The year 1860 proved to be a tumultuous period in American history, setting the stage for the impending conflict that would erupt into the Civil War. As political tensions simmered and sectional divisions deepened, the nation found itself on the brink of a crisis that would ultimately tear it apart.
The presidential election of 1860 became a battleground for competing ideologies and interests. The Democratic Party fractured along regional lines, with Northern Democrats nominating Stephen Douglas and Southern Democrats selecting John C. Breckinridge as their candidate. Meanwhile, the newly formed Republican Party, led by Abraham Lincoln, presented a platform opposed to the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. The issue of slavery lay at the heart of the growing divide between the North and South, as Northern states increasingly embraced abolitionist sentiments. Southern states vehemently defended the institution of slavery, integral to their way of life and economic prosperity. The election of Lincoln, who opposed the expansion of slavery but did not advocate for its immediate abolition, heightened fears among Southern states of encroachment on their rights. In the wake of Lincoln's election victory on November 6, 1860, South Carolina became the first state to secede from the Union on December 20, 1860. Its action was quickly followed by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas, each declaring their independence and forming the Confederate States of America. These secessionist acts represented a fundamental challenge to the authority of the federal government and set the stage for armed conflict.
The year 1860 marked a critical turning point in American history as deep-seated political divisions and ideological differences pushed the nation towards the brink of civil war. The secession of Southern states in response to the election of Abraham Lincoln underscored the irreconcilable differences between North and South, foreshadowing the violent conflict that would engulf the nation in the years to come.
The outbreak of the American Civil War in 1861 marked the culmination of years of mounting tensions and escalating conflicts between the Northern and Southern states. The bombardment of Fort Sumter in April of that year served as the catalyst for open hostilities, plunging the nation into a devastating and protracted conflict.
On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces under the command of General P.G.T. Beauregard initiated the first military action of the Civil War by bombarding Fort Sumter, a federal fort located in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina. The Union garrison, under the command of Major Robert Anderson, surrendered the fort after 34 hours of bombardment, marking the beginning of armed conflict between the North and South. In the wake of the attack on Fort Sumter, President Abraham Lincoln faced the daunting task of rallying the North to defend the Union and suppress the rebellion. On April 15, 1861, Lincoln issued a proclamation calling for 75,000 volunteers to serve in the Union Army for a period of 3 months in order to quell the insurrection. This call to arms galvanized Northern sentiment and marked the official beginning of the Civil War. The attack on Fort Sumter served as a clarion call for other Southern states to join the Confederacy in the weeks following the bombardment. Virginia, Arkansas, Tennessee, and North Carolina seceded from the Union, swelling the ranks of the Confederate States of America, and further escalating tensions between the North and South. The first major engagement of the Civil War occurred on July 21, 1861, near Manassas, Virginia, at a location known as Bull Run. The battle, which pitted Union forces under the command of General Irvin McDowell against Confederate forces, led by Generals P.G.T. Beauregard and Joseph E. Johnston, resulted in a Confederate victory and shattered Northern illusions of a swift and decisive end to the war.
The outbreak of the Civil War in 1861 marked the beginning of a bloody and protracted conflict that would ravage the nation for 4 years. The attack on Fort Sumter and subsequent events served to polarize the nation along ideological and sectional lines, setting the stage for a brutal struggle that would ultimately determine the fate of the Union.
The year 1862 proved to be a pivotal period in the American Civil War, marked by a series of critical events and turning points that shaped the course of the conflict and influenced its ultimate outcome. From decisive battles to strategic maneuvers, these developments had far-reaching implications for both the Union and the Confederacy.
In February 1862, Union forces under the command of General Ulysses S. Grant achieved significant victories at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson in Tennessee. The capture of these key Confederate strongholds opened up the Tennessee River and paved the way for further Union advances into the heart of the Confederacy, demonstrating the growing military prowess of the Union Army. The Battle of Shiloh, fought on April 6 to 7, 1862, near Pittsburgh Landing, Tennessee, proved to be one of the bloodiest engagements of the Civil War up to that point. Union forces, under Grant's command, clashed with Confederate forces led by Generals Albert Sidney Johnston and P.G.T. Beauregard. Despite heavy casualties on both sides, the Union emerged victorious, albeit at a significant cost, solidifying Grant's reputation as a tenacious and determined military leader. In the spring of 1862, Union General George B. McClellan launched the Peninsula Campaign, an ambitious plan to capture the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia. The campaign, marked by a series of battles and skirmishes along the Virginia Peninsula, ultimately ended in failure for the Union, as Confederate General Robert E. Lee successfully repelled McClellan's advances and forced the Union Army to retreat. In late August 1862, Confederate General Robert E. Lee scored a decisive victory over Union forces. Under the command of General John Pope at the Second Battle of Bull Run, also known as the Second Battle of Manassas, Lee's victory effectively ended Pope's Virginia campaign and allowed the Confederacy to maintain the initiative in the eastern theater of the war. The Battle of Antietam, fought on September 17, 1862, near Sharpsburg, Maryland, proved to be a critical turning point in the Civil War, the single bloodiest day of combat in American history. Antietam resulted in staggering casualties on both sides. Although the battle ended in a tactical draw, it provided a strategic victory for the Union, as it halted Lee's first invasion of the North and provided President Abraham Lincoln with the opportunity to issue the Emancipation Proclamation.
The events of 1862, including key battles and strategic maneuvers, played a significant role in shaping the trajectory of the Civil War. From Grant's victories in Tennessee to Lee's successes in Virginia, these turning points underscored the brutal and unpredictable nature of the conflict, setting the stage for the even greater challenges and upheavals that lay ahead.
The year 1863 marked a pivotal turning point in the American Civil War, as a series of significant battles and strategic developments shifted the momentum in favor of the Union. From the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation to the decisive victory at Gettysburg, these events reshaped the course of the conflict and brought the Union closer to victory.
On January 1, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a historic executive order that declared all slaves in Confederate-held territory to be forever free. While the proclamation did not immediately abolish slavery in the United States, it signaled a significant shift in the Union's war aims and transformed the Civil War into a struggle for freedom and equality. From July 1 to July 3, 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg raged in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, culminating in one of the most pivotal engagements of the Civil War. Union forces, under the command of General George G. Meade, clashed with Confederate forces led by General Robert E. Lee in a series of intense and bloody battles. Despite heavy casualties on both sides, the Union emerged victorious, repelling Lee's invasion of the North and inflicting a decisive blow to Confederate morale and momentum. On November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. During the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. In his brief but eloquent speech, Lincoln reaffirmed the principles of freedom, equality, and democracy, honoring the sacrifices of the soldiers who fought and died in the Battle of Gettysburg, and emphasizing the nation's enduring commitment to the ideals of the Declaration of Independence.
The events of 1863 marked a turning point in the American Civil War. As the Union gained momentum and the Confederacy suffered significant setbacks, from the issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation to the decisive victory at Gettysburg, these developments reshaped the course of the conflict and brought the nation closer to the end of slavery and the preservation of the Union. Despite the continued challenges and sacrifices that lay ahead, the events of 1863 represented a significant step forward in the Union's quest for victory and the ultimate triumph of freedom and equality.
The year 1864 witnessed a dramatic escalation in the intensity and brutality of the American Civil War, as both the Union and the Confederacy embraced a strategy of total war aimed at achieving decisive victory. From the relentless campaigns in Virginia to Sherman's devastating march through Georgia, the war reached new levels of destruction and devastation.
In 1864, Union General Ulysses S. Grant launched the Overland Campaign, a series of brutal battles and engagements aimed at defeating Confederate General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. The campaign, characterized by relentless fighting and staggering casualties, culminated in the Siege of Petersburg, a protracted siege that lasted for nearly 10 months and ultimately led to the fall of Richmond, the Confederate capital. The Battle of the Wilderness, fought from May 5 to May 7, 1864, in Spotsylvania County, Virginia, marked the beginning of the Overland Campaign. Union forces under the command of General Grant clashed with Confederate forces led by General Lee in a dense and tangled forest, known as the Wilderness. The battle, characterized by its ferocity and high casualty rates, ended in a tactical draw but set the stage for a further Union advances towards Richmond. In September 1864, Union General William T. Sherman launched his infamous March to the Sea, a devastating military campaign aimed at crippling the Confederate war effort and breaking the will of the Southern population. Leading a force of over 60,000 men, Sherman marched through Georgia, leaving a trail of destruction in his wake as his troops burned plantations, destroyed infrastructure, and confiscated supplies. The march culminated in the capture of Savannah in December 1864, further demoralizing the Confederacy and hastening its ultimate collapse.
The events of 1864 marked a watershed moment in the American Civil War, as both the Union and the Confederacy embraced a strategy of total war aimed at achieving decisive victory. From the relentless fighting in Virginia to Sherman's devastating march through Georgia, the war reached new levels of destruction and devastation. Despite the enormous human cost and suffering, these campaigns played a decisive role in bringing the Confederacy to its knees and ultimately securing victory for the Union.
The year 1865 marked the culmination of the American Civil War, as the Union emerged victorious and the Confederate States of America ceased to exist. From the surrender of Confederate armies to the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, the events of 1865 ushered in a new era for the United States, characterized by Reconstruction and the pursuit of national unity.
On April 9, 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered his Army of Northern Virginia, to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, effectively bringing an end to major Confederate military resistance. The surrender, which followed a series of defeats, the Confederacy, signaled the collapse of the Southern cause and the beginning of the end of the Civil War. Tragically, just days after Lee's surrender, President Abraham Lincoln fell victim to an assassin's bullet on the evening of April 14, 1865. Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth. While attending a performance at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., he died the following morning, plunging the nation into mourning and casting a shadow over the Union's victory. In the weeks following Lee's surrender, other Confederate forces in the South followed suit. On April 26, 1865, Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston surrendered his Army of Tennessee to Union General William T. Sherman in North Carolina, effectively ending significant Confederate resistance in the Carolinas, Georgia, and Florida. With the surrender of Confederate armies and the collapse of the Southern war effort, the Confederate States of America ceased to exist as a functioning government. The Confederate government disbanded, and Confederate soldiers returned home, marking the definitive end of the Confederacy and the restoration of the Union.
The events of 1865 marked the end of a tumultuous chapter in American history, as the Civil War came to a close and the nation began the process of healing and rebuilding. From the surrender of Confederate armies to the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln, these events shaped the course of the nation and set the stage for the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead during the era of Reconstruction.